Welcome to episode 75 of the World Builder's Anvil. As always, I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic, let's build a new insect race. Part 1, Finding Your Inspiration. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Okay, now I'm going to do a series about building a new race, and this is going to be insect race, a non-humanoid race, something a little bit different than what I've really built before. I don't think I've ever built a non-mammal race before. All right, so for purposes of this does not really belong to my Game World Garduel, although maybe I might make it part of it at some point. However, it does belong to Podcastia. Now, if you've seen the maps, that is free as part of my newsletter that you can get from garduel.com. I'm not sure where I'm going to place them there yet. If you have any ideas, please let me know where you think would be an interesting place for a new race. Now, for inspiration, there are two major kinds of ants that inspired me to create this race. One, weaver ants. Weaver ants are this interesting ant. I believe they live in tropical areas, in rainforest, up in trees, and they actually build their nest up in trees. And that's why they're called weavers, because they essentially take probably leaf bits or plant life bits, and they cobble them together and transform them into a material of which they build homes out of. And another one is grass cutter ants. And these guys come from Africa. I'm pretty sure that's the only place they are. And I always found them interesting, and I talked about them a little bit before as well, too, because they actually cut grass, carry it back to their nest. They don't eat grass. They cannot get any nutrition from grass, but they feed grass and literally create a farm from it. And inside of their little cities. And they actually have to overcome problems to do that because the fungus they grow, that they feed the grass to this fungus, they eat the fungus. But the chemicals given off by the fungus can kill the ants. So they have ventilation and they have all sorts of interesting things. Now, one of the reasons I picked ants are ants have a different sort of mind structure than any animals that I know. Any mammals, at least, that I know. They're colony-based, sort of like with bees. I'd imagine some kind of wasps and hornets. I don't think all kinds of wasps and hornets do it, but honeybees definitely do it. Ants definitely do it. And there are different kinds of insects that sort of have a social structure. And that's what ants do. The other thing I find interesting about ants are, even though they're from the same species of ants, they have different body types for different jobs. There's always a queen ant. There's always a male ant. Usually, I believe they're always winged, but I'm not positive on that. And the male ants will usually, I think it's one time, impregnate a queen, and the queen will just start laying eggs. Besides those two, there's always at least a worker ant. The worker ant keeps the colony alive. They do the work to help protect the queen and feed her and keep her safe. They will sacrifice themselves without thought towards their queen. So I think ants are a very interesting social structure. It'll give me a little bit something different socially to work for. A lot of times I get stuck with mammals we're thinking like humans. And a lot of times because most mammals think in very similar terms to humans. And insects sort of have a different mental state, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong, but than humans do. So it'll allow for different kinds of social structures in my mind. Now, what I plan to do in this episode is go over some of the things that I want from a race. I think it's good up front to have some idea of what you want. So the traits, and I don't mean this in the sense I use it, so traits is a bad word. I apologize for that. But what are the different, what's the metadata, I guess, for this ant race? One, protected food supply. I think that's something very neat with grass cutter ants. They have a protected food supply. It's inside of their homes. Dense urban colonies, once again, many kind of ants do this, but essentially a nest. And inside the nest, there are tunnels and ventilation systems and chambers. And I kind of like that breakout. Brief farming, and I talked a little bit about that already, but the ability that they are making their own food. They can't get it from the environment around them. 4 is crafting. That's sort of where I'm getting the weaver ants from, this idea that they construct things that they need out of the materials in the environment around them, much like humans do, but for different purpose and in different ways. They're not mining earth for metal. They are mining plants for material that they can mix up with goo. And I'll get more specific into that when I'm actually developing the race. And 4 different body types. And that's one of the things I find fascinating about ants are, you see a picture of army ants and you have these giant things with giant mandibles, and those are soldiers and they will fight to the death, and they're very tough and they're very hard to beat. And then you have the little workers, and a lot of time there'll even be different kinds of, even within worker structures, there can be different kinds of ants. So we're going to kind of come up with different body types of the same species, the same race, because they have no backbone, but it's some sort of DNA sequence, and it's sort of going to be causing this sort of, you have a plan from birth because you were born to be a queen. You were born to be worker. You were born to be a soldier. And I kind of think it'll be an interesting idea to explore a little bit with this new race, yet unnamed. Okay. Now, what's the body type? Well, obviously, there's no backbone in an insect. There's carapaces. There's essentially armored segments of this ant, and inside it is the bug goo. And bug goo can vary a little bit per bug. However, it's essentially goo inside of a shell. They have 6 legs. However, for the purposes of my race, 2 of the legs can be used as arms and can grasp. And really, all the legs can grasp, but 2 are really meant, like an ant can kind of stand up, think a little bit like a centaur, where there are 4 legs that are down and 2 that are up. My kind of ants, or at least some of them, will be able to operate in that mode. I'm not sure exactly how at this point. This is really a brainstorming exercise. 2 antennae. Antennae are used a lot for communications, for finding directions. They pull in sensory data, and they give it to the ant, and they give off data. So 2 antennae. And finally, once again, different body types. And right now I'm thinking a social class for a queen, flying males, soldiers, gatherers, workers, and craftsmen. And so now I have this goal for what I want in an insect species. I know it's going to be ant-based. I know there's going to be a social structure from a queen with a couple different kinds of workers and soldiers and flying males. And so essentially in the next episode in part 2, I'm going to actually start taking these parts and building together a basic belief system for them. And then from there, we'll sort of grow out the basics of ant society, probably in a 3rd episode. It depends on how long it's going to take. Remember to please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes. If you've not, I really appreciate that. And give me comments back. Especially for this one, if you shoot me on Twitter at Jeffrey, Jeffery Wingram, and say, hey, this is the name I think you should use for this ant. Or, hey, I think you can even tell me you think an ant species is silly or whatever. I don't care. Shoot me a comment. Let me know what you think about insect races. Now, the rating for this episode, this is a basic topic. It's a very important thing to do before you start building a new race or a new monster. Have a goal of what you want it to be like. Now, if you are like me and you want sort of a naturalistically designed race, you have to kind of think things out a little bit more. And if not, you really have the core for your race as a species. Like for me, it's kind of important how they fit into the ecosystem. That might not be the case for you, in which case you have the basic idea of what your race is at this point, and you start building around it. And also, the thing is, I'm going to be looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of the race to determine what they're going to do, how they're going to build. Now, the world building task for the day. Create some goals for a new insect race for your world. Just sort of scratch them down. And this might not be a race that you end up using, but it's just a good exercise. It's a good thing to think through how races are built. So take the time along with me, put down some goals. If you belong to my email newsletter, shoot them over to me through my email newsletter, which you can get through from garduel.com as well. To sign up for my email newsletter, send me the specs for your race, and we can start a conversation about it. Now, the real world task for the day. Now, I've actually, in the chaos of all the things that have been going on in my life, I just started doing a new course from internet guru that I have a lot of respect for, Tim Grohl. And I just essentially went through a chunk of one of the courses I actually paid for from Tim called Launch a Bestseller. And it's the idea of putting a marketing plan together that will fit you from where you are. And if you're like me and you're a beginner and you're like, hey, I don't have very many fans, or I have very few fans. As an author, this will be my first book going out. So the first fans I'm going to be gathering from this book is about to start. So he told me how to do it, but he has information that goes from people that are like me, who are very low down, all the way up to people who are on the New York Times bestseller. And that's not an Amazon bestseller, it's New York Times bestseller. So if you're anywhere from a New York Times bestseller down to someone who has 0 fans, Launch a Bestseller is a way to put together a plan to help you turn your fiction into book sales. And maybe if you're video games, you can abstract it out because you have a computer mind, and you can apply that towards selling fictional computer games or tabletop games as well too. But there's a link to it on my show notes at garduel.com for this episode. This is not an affiliate program I belong to. I paid him money. I will not see even a dime of it if you even buy a course from him. I think the course is worth the investment. If nothing else, sign up for his newsletter. The information he sends out there, and he'll do some free courses as well too. Every once in a while, he'll let you know about those. And his free courses I would pay for all of the free courses I've had from him. So I think there's a huge value here. Let me know if you sign up for it, and we can chat about it and try and get the most out of it we can. Now, the tease for the next episode is part 2, From Inspiration to a New Race. And as always, make sure to go to garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to, and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at garduel.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.